Well, good morning, everyone. This is Keith Eastland from Miller Johnson. Thanks for joining us on short notice this mid-morning. I'm happy to report that I am out of my bed clothes and ready to roll for the day at 11 o'clock here. I'm joined this morning by my friend and partner, Rebecca Strauss, and we have the occasion to... Oh, go ahead, Rebecca. Say hello.
I said all I wanted to say right now, Keith, which was good morning. That's it.
Okay. Are you out of your pajamas yet?
I am always out of my pajamas, ready to go at a moment's notice.
Fantastic. Well, Rebecca and I have the opportunity on short notice to put together some materials and kind of walk manufacturing clients and interested parties through what the executive order that was issued yesterday afternoon from Governor Whitmer, what that means for resumed operations in manufacturing. And the idea of this webinar is going to be sort of rifle shot, kind of get right into what's required so that you guys, I know you're very busy, and you're going to want to get to a lot of the things, especially as you work. If you're not already operating as a critical manufacturer, then you're going to be wanting to focus on what you need to do to get ready to roll on Monday. So where are we? Real quick recap. Still in the global pandemic, okay? The real point here is this is unlikely to go away for a long time. I think the reports that I'm seeing, the articles that I'm reading, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, et cetera, everybody's sort of acknowledging this is becoming what Rebecca said to me earlier, is it's a new normal, right? This is like anything else. We have to deal with it. We're going to have to operate our businesses and you know, our lives, frankly, around this. So it's here to stay. State of emergency in Michigan was extended. The governor extended that through May 28th. Okay, you've all heard there's been a legislature has filed a lawsuit this week. The legislature is challenging the declaration of the state of emergency, that the governor does not have the authority to do that unilaterally, and therefore the executive orders issued based on that emergency are not enforceable. So I'll say this up front, there are questions about whether these executive orders remain enforceable. If you're interested in that, I'm happy to talk about that at length. I find it very fascinating, interesting legal issue. I think there are arguments that there are on both sides of that. I also think that there may be some better arguments that unilateral action by the governor violates the separation of powers principles. That's Keith Eastland's view, not Miller Johnson's view. But I'm happy to talk about that, but I'm raising that up front only because I want people to know, if you look at this and you say, and when I get finished and Rebecca tells you all the things you have to do, and you say, well, that's going to be a tremendous cost to me. I do think there are arguments to explore, and I'm not saying you should do this, but if you find this to be onerous and you believe it's going to impact your business in a way that's going to not allow you to operate profitably or efficiently, there may be some arguments. I'm saying that up front. I think the majority of our clients are interested in complying with these things because it makes good sense to, whether or not they're enforceable or not. Because I think a lot of folks get it, right? Either they are enforceable, you could agree with that, and they may be. Or you may look at this and say, well, why wouldn't we do all these things? Because everybody agrees. Everybody agrees that when operations resume, we need to do it safely. We all agree on that. And frankly, you might not want to be the company that's, doesn't do these things, and you end up with a significant outbreak at your plant and the media attention and all those things. So I just wanted to say that up front so people realize that there are two sides of this. So what happened last night, yesterday afternoon? The governor extended the stay-at-home order through May 28th. In doing that, she has permitted non-critical manufacturing to resume operations on the 11th of May. And this is part of the governor's Michigan Safe Start plan that has 6 phases. And you can see them there of the pandemic here: controlled growth, persistent spread, flattening, which I believe is where we are right now under her plan, improving, containing, and post-pandemic. And as we move through these phases, the idea is the governor is going to continue to allow more and more restricted activities to go back to where they were, subject, of course, to strict mitigation and precautionary measures. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about May 11th, manufacturing activities. Good news, they can resume. Okay. And there's really two groups of requirements that we want to talk about today for manufacturers when they operate under the Executive Order 77. Okay, that is what we call, one group is in-person work requirements. And these are the in-person work requirements for every employer, for every business operation that has been operating. Construction was released or opened up on May 7th, and there have been other industries that have been permitted to work as well. And so these in-person requirements kind of apply more broadly or generally to everyone. And I'm going to cover those. And then Rebecca is going to talk about the next group, group 2, which is enhanced requirements for manufacturers. Sort of what are the specific things that the governor's order says you need to do as a manufacturer. And then Rebecca is going to finish up and talk about a few other concerns. If you've been operating, you've already thought about these things, but if you're just resuming operations or gearing back up, then there's some additional considerations that you need to think through, including, how does the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, does it apply to me? What are the leave requirements? You're going to have a lot of employee issues, as well as Executive Order 36, which is the order protecting workers. That's sort of the order that made it public policy. It's not sort of, it is. It is the order that made it public policy for people that have symptoms of COVID-19, test positive, or who have close contact with an individual who is symptomatic or has a confirmed case of COVID-19. They need to self-quarantine, and it sets forth the requirements when they can leave and return to work. So that all gets incorporated now that you're going to be operating again. And Rebecca can talk about that in detail. Okay, so let's get right to resumed activities. Okay, what can be resumed? Manufacturing. There are no real carve-outs or limits as I read the order, so it's any manufacturing can resume effective 12:01 a.m. on Monday, so Monday morning, essentially, unless you want to start at midnight, I guess you can. So you're subject to in-person work requirements and specific manufacturing enhanced requirements. If you are currently operating, my guess is you have done a lot of these things, right? We're going to talk about a lot of these things that are in this executive order, and my guess is you've already implemented or done them. So you can probably breathe a little easier instead of making sure you've covered all the new things and packaged it up in a way that if someone asks, well, why are you operating, you can quickly show them and that you've complied with all the different mandates here that we're going to talk about today. So, but it is interesting to remember that if you're currently operating, you should be doing these things already. Now, the practical reality is you need a little bit of time to do them, and my guess is no one's going to start looking at this until Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, if even then. One interesting question that I know we're going to get, or some clients have already asked, and that is, what if I'm already operating? Do these new enhanced requirements apply to me as well, or do I get to continue operating as a critical infrastructure, essential business that's separate? And I will tell you that my reading of the executive order, and Rebecca can disagree with me or chime in here if she'd like, but I think it applies to all continued operations. So even if you're already operating critical, the plain language of the executive order, I think, covers it. I think that is the governor's intent here, and I think that's how they'll likely view this. With one little caveat, I do think there are some technical arguments that could be made to suggest that, well, it doesn't apply. If you're interested in that, happy to talk to you offline, but I think that's high risk, and I think before you would make that argument, you'd want to vet that pretty significantly, and that's kind of where I am. So I think from the perspective of this webinar, we're going to talk about this as if it applies because that's what the plain language suggests. Rebecca, do you agree with that?
I completely agree with that. And I'll just add the following point. Most of the things you'll find that are required of manufacturers, even if it wasn't required in the executive order, it has a lot of benefits to you in terms of creating confidence in your employees, that you know what you're doing, that their safety is important to you, and that you've put appropriate protocols in place. Your employees, most of them, will want you to be doing these things, and it will help you get people to work who might be a little nervous or uncomfortable.
Excellent points, right? Because your ability to be effective and profitable is going to turn on employee engagement, and your people need to feel like you're doing everything that you should be doing to keep them safe. And as I said at the beginning, everyone agrees, we need to keep and operate safely, because the last thing we want is open up manufacturing and there's a number of plants, facilities where there's significant outbreak, and then we get reined back in, and then business can't go. You guys do not want to be in a yo-yo situation. So very good follow-up points, Rebecca. So what do you need to do? It is important that if you're going to have resumed operations, you must designate the employees as part of your resumed operations in writing. If you're already operating, you've done this for critical infrastructure workers, but there has to be written designations for additional workers that are going to be in the manufacturing setting under this resumed activities prong of the executive order. Good news is that this can be done by electronic message, public website, or other appropriate means. So if you have email, if your employees have email, you send them an email designating them that they are resumed and important, and so they'll have that. You can post it on your public website. If you have questions about that, I know we have sample written designations that Rebecca or I can send to you, and I know we'll talk about this later, but Miller Johnson has a back-to-work resource center that is gathering and making available all of these different resources in sort of a one-shop location where you can get these samples. Another important point in reopening is your suppliers. Executive Order 77, it actually fixed the problem for construction, because when the construction order came out opening up construction, it was unclear whether or not the construction industry could designate downstream suppliers to support their operations. This new executive order adds that, and it applies to manufacturers. So if you have suppliers that you need to make sure are operating, you can send them a letter designating them. Hey, look, we are resumed operations. We're permitted to operate under Executive Order 77. Here's why we need you, and here's the letter saying that you should resume and support us and that you can lawfully do so. Again, we have sample letters, if you haven't already done this, that we can get with you, we can work with you, and we can make sure that you notify all your suppliers to get things back online for your plants. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the general in-person work requirements. And we have a whole entire webinar that you can check out online if you haven't already attended on general back to work issues. And so some of this may be a repeat for folks on the webinar, but I'll cover it pretty quickly. First is everybody that operates in person during the pandemic must have a preparedness and response plan. That preparedness response plan is required to be consistent with the OSHA guidance on preparing workplaces for the COVID-19 pandemic. And that OSHA guidance is not a rule or standard, it is advisory in nature. But we have prepared, Miller Johnson has, a sample preparedness response plan that we can get to you and you can make sure that you've done. My guess is many of you already either have that plan or you already have many components that are required of that plan. And so what I've been counseling clients on is we get you if you don't have it in place, we get you the preparedness response plan, the draft, the model, and then you can kind of see what's required, and then you can kind of look at, okay, we already have that in place, we've already done this over here, and then maybe you put together a table of contents and a plan that, so if someone asks you for it, you pull it out and say, here are all the things we've done, and that's compliant with and consistent with, I should say, the OSHA requirements. So written preparedness and response plan is necessary. Second thing, make sure you're only bringing in necessary employees. If your production requires 40 people to come in, bring in 40. Don't bring in 45. Promote telework. If there are people, buyers or inventory folks that really can work from home and telework, then they should continue to do so. You shouldn't just let everybody that can continue to telework back into the plant because your operations are there. It may be more convenient, understood, but anybody you're bringing back off of telework, my suggestion is you make sure that it passes the smell test. Do we really need this person to support operations? A classic example that I've seen is inspectors or supervisors who need to be there. Well, do they really need to be there? Okay, yeah, sure. Could they be there for 2 hours instead of all day? Because there's certain periods in your manufacturing process where, you need some check, that sort of thing. So just be cognizant of teleworking and making sure you're not bringing too many people back unless they're needed. Third is social distancing practices. 6 feet rule, we're all probably a little tired of hearing it. We all get it. Make sure within the facility people understand, and Rebecca's going to talk about the employee training requirements, but folks need to maintain consistently that 6-foot distance whenever they can. Okay. Fourth, this is new, okay? In the past, the executive orders that permitted operations said that you had to make non-medical grade facial coverings such as masks available for employees, and that you didn't necessarily have to require them to wear the masks in all circumstances. That's changed. Now, under this executive order, the governor is mandating that everybody wear masks if your workers or employees cannot consistently maintain 6 feet of separation. So if they're working together, they're working near each other, and they can't consistently maintain that difference, then not only must you provide it, but then masks must be worn. That's a requirement. In addition, she added the suggestion that you should at least consider having employees wear face shields if they cannot consistently maintain 3 feet of separation. So that's a new requirement on the masks, facial coverings. The next one is increased cleaning and disinfection. This, again, good practices, right? Of course, you need to do this. You make sure that you're going through periodically during every shift, making sure you're cleaning and disinfecting any areas that are commonly touched, that are commonly used, bathrooms, door plates, anything that common surfaces that people are touching. We want to make sure that there's a strict, increased protocol for cleaning and disinfection. What are you going to do for a positive test? That's the next one. You need to have a written protocol for cleaning. How are you going to clean? How are you going to disinfect? We can help you with that protocol if you don't already have one. In addition, I would suggest that every employer ought to have and have thought through, what are you going to do? Not just the cleaning part of the positive test, but you should have a protocol that kind of goes through all the immediate steps and how you're going to respond if you have a positive test in your workforce or someone displays symptoms. What are the things you're going to do? Because again, as Rebecca pointed out, your employees are going to want to know, right? If Eastland Manufacturing gets a positive test because Rebecca tested positive, people are going to want to know, where was she? What are you doing to clean? How are you protecting us? That sort of thing. And obviously, we're not going to share Rebecca's name unless she gave us permission. And how do we keep that confidentiality? We've prepared or put together a sample protocol for an employee positive test, and we've worked with a number of different clients in different areas to tailor that. And so that's another thing that's available on that return to work resource page, as well as something we can provide to you if that's something you're interested in. Reach out to us after the webinar. All right, the next bullet point, policies and screening to prevent employees with symptoms or employees who have close contact with confirmed cases of COVID-19 from working. So what are we doing to screen and make sure that workers aren't coming back? There's a more detailed process that's in part of the enhanced requirements that Rebecca's going to talk about there. And then the last piece is adopt the other social distancing practices and mitigation measures, it's a typo, sorry, recommended by the CDC. So washing our hands more frequently, making sure that if somebody has to cough or sneeze, they do it covered, right? That sort of thing. Make sure we're doing those things. So those are the in-person requirements. And I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to talk about the enhanced requirements. And so, Rebecca.
Thanks, Keith. Next slide, please. So as Keith mentioned, Executive Order 77 has specific requirements just for manufacturing facilities. It is in section K, 11K of the executive order for those of you that would like to read along with me or afterwards. And there are 16 specific additional requirements. We've made them a little easier to understand here. So I will explain them to you. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box. First of all, for manufacturers, daily entry screening protocol is now required. This is very similar to what is required for hospitals and nursing homes and other facilities that have been up and running this whole time. So what does a screening protocol look like? It can be as simple as a questionnaire that asks about the typical COVID-19 symptoms, which you should rely on the CDC for. Those are right now, they are fever over 100, atypical cough, and atypical shortness of breath. And then you also need to ask about exposure to suspected or confirmed cases of COVID-19. Again, you can have someone actually asking the questions, or you can have employees fill out a questionnaire and hand it in. Temperature screening. Temperature screening is now required at manufacturers' facilities before individuals enter the facility. But in a gift, in my opinion, to employers, the requirement becomes effective as soon as no-touch thermometers can be obtained by you. So you should, as of today, be making a good faith effort to do one of two things. Obtain no-touch thermometers. Now, those are going to be in high demand, just like face masks, right? So the executive order obviously recognizes that challenge and doesn't expect you to be able to get them within 24 hours, but you should either be making a good faith effort to get those, or you should look into partnering with a health care agency. And there's a few, if you need recommendations on some our clients have used, reach out to Keith or me, but there are companies that will send out a nurse or a medical assistant or someone like that to take the temperatures of your employees as they come in, right? So if you, as a HR person or whatever your role is in the organization, do not want to be doing that, I certainly don't want to be doing it outside of Miller Johnson's offices. There are other people that can do that for you, okay? This screening has to be conducted for every single individual that enters your facility. So it's not just employees. I say employees because it's easier, but it's really any individual coming in. So any guest, any supplier, any vendor, right? Anyone. This may seem very odd to us right now, but as Keith said, this isn't going away anytime soon, and people will become used to this type of screening before entering facilities. Next, you need to have a dedicated entry point at every facility for this daily screening. And that makes sense, right? If you have 15 different entrances, it's going to be very hard to conduct the screening and temperature check. So you're going to want to streamline, really limit the number of entrances so that you can do the screening at every entrance when folks come into your building. You need to suspend all non-essential in-person visits. I'm sorry, I missed the point earlier, but well, and you need to, when you're dedicating these entry points, you need to ensure physical barriers are in place to prevent anyone from bypassing the screening. So think of airport security lines, right, where they have little barricades up and then just a little opening. So you're going to have to get creative and think about how to do that. Next, you need to suspend all non-essential in-person visits. So I mentioned that these rules apply to anyone entering the facility, but really only the people entering this facility should be employees and other essential in-person visits. Okay, next slide, Keith. Here's a brand new requirement that right now only applies to manufacturers. In my humble opinion, it will probably be required of other types of employers as well. And frankly, it's just a good idea. As I mentioned earlier, this executive order requires manufacturing facilities to train every single employee on a number of different items. Okay, so that's everyone, what Keith and I call top to bottom training. Okay, so from your lowest paid worker all the way up to the CEO. Everyone needs to receive this training. I'm going to go through the elements of the training and then some practical issues. All employees need to be trained on the following: how COVID-19 is transmitted from person to person, the distance that the virus can travel in the air remains viable in the air and on environmental surfaces, symptoms of COVID-19, steps employees must take to notify you of any symptoms of COVID-19 or a suspected or confirmed diagnosis, the measures the facility is taking to prevent worker exposure. That's many of the things that Keith talked about earlier in this webinar and are probably in your COVID-19 plan as well. Next slide, please. The rules the employee must follow in order to prevent exposure and spread the virus, and the use of PPE, personal protective equipment, including the proper steps for putting it on and taking it off. Okay, let's pause there. Those are all the elements required for training. So the first thing to think about is, how are you actually going to do this training when you cannot gather all of your employees in one place, or even, really any group of any size in one place where folks can't maintain a safe distance from each other? Every facility and operation is different, so I don't pretend to know what will work best for you, but that is something you need to think about. One strategy may be having the largest room you have set aside for this training and roll through maybe 10 or 15 employees at a time, right, or whatever makes sense, so long that as people are distanced at least 6 feet apart. If you work in a facility where at least some of the folks are, have computers or access to computers, you may want to train that way. We have Miller Johnson on Monday. We'll have a training video available to you on our resource center. It will not have facility-specific information to your facility, obviously. We can prepare a customized video if you'd like, a training video that you can then show over and over again to your employees. But the one available on our resource center that Keith mentioned earlier, and I'll have a slide at the end that shows you how to get to it, will be a generic training video that covers the topics that the executive order requires, but does not cover things like the specific actions your facility is taking to prevent COVID-19 and the specific information people need to understand about, for instance, where hand washing stations are, right? That's the sort of thing that you and your supervisors would have to add on or do in person. So that training requirement is new under the executive order. Again, it just applies to manufacturing facilities. So if you are in touch with colleagues in different kinds of industries, non-manufacturing, and they don't know what the heck you're talking about, that's why. Frankly, as with most of these steps, it's probably a good idea to conduct this training anyway. If you have not been up and running and you're bringing employees back, they're going to have questions, they're going to be nervous, they're going to want to know what you've done to protect them. And this hopefully will calm their nerves and instill confidence in them that you are on top of it, that you would not bring them back unless you had thought these things through and done everything you can to keep your employees safe. Okay, what else does the executive order require of manufacturers? Again, stepping aside from training. The executive order requires manufacturers to take steps to reduce congestion in common spaces. Common spaces are things like cafeterias, kitchens, break rooms, those sorts of things, conference rooms. So we have to think about how to have very few people in those areas at any one time. Where possible, the executive order requires you to implement rotational shift schedules. I'll tell you what that means. Some of you have probably already started thinking about concepts like this. To the extent you haven't, you are now ordered to consider it. So if you're not doing rotational shifts, you should be able to explain why you are not. Rotational shifts involve spreading out the shifts throughout the day or week or month so that less people are in the facility at any one time. So for example, you may have an A team and a B team where the A team works for 2 weeks and maybe it's 50% of your crew, the A team works, and then they take 2 weeks off and then the B team works. Or maybe you used to have one shift and now you have 3, right? So you split your team up into 3 groups and they're spread out over 24 hours instead of just 8 or 9, which reduces congestion, right, and makes social distancing easier, that sort of thing. So really the options are limited only by your imagination and what works practically in your facility and with your folks. Again, if you're not going to implement rotational shift schedules that reduces the folks in your plant at one time, you're going to have to explain, you're going to have to be able to explain why, okay? The executive order also wants you to stagger start times and meal times. This is in addition to the rotational shift schedule concept, and that obviously is just to reduce congestion at the entry points and in the cafeteria or break rooms. Next slide, please, Keith. Where practicable, they want you to install temporary physical barriers between workstations and between cafeteria tables. So what are temporary physical barriers? Just anecdotally, I've heard of plexiglass, either like a plexiglass wall or half wall, either hanging from the ceiling or in a stand on the ground in between people. This is particularly, by the way, where people cannot be 6 feet away because of the machinery they're working on or the line they're on or what have you. I've seen, like we have in office spaces, we have cubbies, right? We have those, and a lot of them are modular. So I've heard of people kind of taking apart the modular cubbies and just using a wall that would normally be part of a modular cubicle, but they are just setting those in between workers and manufacturing facilities. That's another concept. Again, this is really only limited by your imagination and the physical constraints of your facility and probably a little bit of money too. And it does say, thankfully, where practicable. So if you're not installing physical barriers between workstations, you need to be able to explain why. You need to create protocols for personal contact upon delivery of materials to the facility. So suppliers, right? How are they going to supply materials and keep your folks safe and you keep them safe as well? At minimum, really a good idea to have folks sign in and out so you can keep track of who has been in and out of your facility. That'll really help if contact tracing picks up in Michigan and around the country. But other protocols can be, they don't actually enter your facility. There could be hand washing stations right there. They could be required to wear a mask. If they are entering your facility, they're going to have to be health screened, of course. You need to adapt protocols to limit the sharing of tools and equipment. Hopefully that's in your COVID-19 plan or will be in your COVID-19 plan. And while the executive order just says adapt protocols to limit, I mean, you really need to take that seriously, because the germ, the virus living on things that we touch and then pass on to the next person is a major, major source of transmission of the virus. You need to frequently and thoroughly clean and disinfect high-touch surfaces. Frankly, this is not much different than what's required for all employers that Keith already mentioned, except in the executive order as it relates to manufacturers. They say when cleaning, please pay particular attention to parts, products, and shared equipment. That's probably because those are the types of things that more than one person will touch in a day, right? So anything that more than one person will touch in a day should get your particular attention when you're disinfecting. Next slide, please. You need to have sufficient hand washing or hand sanitizing stations. You may have to add stations beyond your bathrooms, right? And if you think of, at fairs or at apple orchards or things like that, if you've seen these temporary, they're usually Purell hand washing stations. You may want to get your hands on some of those. You could even just set up tables in various convenient locations with Purell. You could have if you can get your hands on the Purell, or you can have individual bottles at each person's workstation. That might make people feel even more comfortable if they can sanitize their hands as often as they want without leaving their station. The CEO says that you have to discontinue the use of hand dryers. So in addition to everything else on your to-do list, I'm sure none of you have anything to do getting your plants back up and running. You have to go into the bathrooms and disable your hand dryers. It could be just putting a sheet over it or something, right, with the do not use sign on it if you don't want to get too complicated. The concept there is that the air blowing out of the hand dryers, to the extent that you have a virus on your hands, it then blows the virus off of your hands and all over the place and just makes the situation worse. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about something that I know is on a lot of your minds. What do you do if an employee has symptoms of COVID-19? And what do you do if an employee has a positive, has tested positive for COVID-19? The executive order addresses both of those situations for manufacturing facilities. Again, we're still just in the part of the executive order talking about manufacturing facilities. Let's talk about symptomatic employees first, okay? Employees who have some sort of symptom of COVID-19. First, you need to encourage them to self-report to plant leaders as soon as possible after developing symptoms of COVID-19. I'm going to add something here that's not part of the executive order, but we've heard anecdotally from clients a few situations where a symptomatic person or even a test positive employee has come into the facility, wandered around the facility for some time trying to locate a supervisor to tell them they are COVID-19 positive. So while not part of the executive order, I would highly recommend that workers be told to call in, right? Call in. Do anything they can to get that message to their plant leader that they are symptomatic without actually entering the facility. Okay, and frankly, with the health screenings in place, hopefully they wouldn't be able to enter anyway. But we've heard more than one story, which I won't bore you with, although they're kind of funny, about workers being in facilities for quite some time with either symptoms or a positive test, just to report that fact. Okay, next. Once you have an employee who has identified themselves as symptomatic, you need to shut that area of your facility down for cleaning and disinfection, okay? It says as necessary. So obviously it depends on what the employee is, what their role is and what they've been touching. But if they are on a machine and they have been, and then they come down with symptoms and then they leave, you need to shut that part of the machine down and disinfect before anyone else touches it, okay? You need to maintain a central log for symptomatic workers. This should be kept by HR and kept confidential, okay? But you need to maintain a central log for symptomatic workers. Next slide, please. What happens now if there's a positive case of COVID-19 in the facility? You need to notify the plant leaders that there has been a positive case without identifying the individual's name, okay? Notify plant leaders without identifying the individual's name. You need to notify potentially exposed individuals. These would be individuals that have been within 6 feet of the COVID-19, of the positive case of COVID-19 for any extended period of time. These are not individuals who pass that person in the hall. Okay, these are individuals, again, for extended period of time. Extended has been defined differently in different places, but suffice it to say it's more than passing in the hallway or passing in the bathroom. It would be people in the workstations nearby, someone that the COVID-19 employee had to talk to on a regular basis, that sort of thing. You tell those people without revealing the individual's name. You send the potentially exposed individuals home, so that group of folks that you just notified get sent home, and then you maintain a central log for workers who test positive. So you have to maintain a log for folks who are symptomatic, as well as for folks who test positive, and consistent with our obligations to keep medical information confidential, we should keep that confidential. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about some things that have changed. This is for folks that have not been continually running since COVID-19 began. Some of you on the phone have, right? You may have reduced operations, but you've been up and running, so you have kept up on the different legal requirements regarding employees. But some of you really have not, and there's been a kind of a skeleton crew working from home, and you're going to get ramped back up. So if you're in that category, getting ramped back up, or you just want a refresher, I'm just going to talk about the most two important laws regarding employees, just real quick. We have had webinars on these topics, particularly many on the FFCRA. You are welcome to go back to Miller Johnson's website and look for full hour webinars on these topics, or reach out to Keith and I afterwards with questions. Okay, the FFCRA was effective as of April 1st. This is a federal law that provides paid leave for a variety of reasons. Importantly, it only impacts employers of 500 or less, okay? So if you have more than 500 employees, you can turn off your ears for a moment. For the rest of you, you now have to provide paid sick leave of 2 weeks. It is for 6 different reasons, childcare being one of them, if a child's childcare or school is closed because of COVID-19, and then various COVID-19 reasons, right? Being ill, staying home to take care of someone who's ill, et cetera. And again, that is up to 2 weeks. The FFCRA also provides for expanded FMLA. The only reason that qualifies for expanded FMLA is childcare. Okay, again, because if a school or childcare center was closed because of COVID-19. And that is, it's kind of interesting how they did it. So technically it's up to 12 weeks, only 10 weeks are paid, the latter 10. And the way this is supposed to work is the first 2 weeks are part of that emergency paid sick leave that I mentioned first. And then the last 10 weeks would be paid via the FMLA. Okay, we've got on our resource page, we've got forms dealing with requesting leave for these purposes, because you do need to get specific information from your employees for them to be eligible for these leaves. It's not onerous, but you do need to get it, and they need to affirm it. And that is because any money you folks pay to the employees who qualify for this leave, that money is you get a tax credit for. And so the IRS says to get a tax credit, we need some sort of verification that the leave actually qualified under the FFCRA. Again, we could talk probably for 2 or 3 hours just about these leaves, but those are the nuts and bolts, and please let us know if you're not up to speed on these and need to get there. Okay, next slide, please. Something else that has changed since you were last operating before COVID-19 is EEO 36, okay, 2020-36. It says that workers should stay home and employers cannot retaliate against a worker who stays home under the following circumstances. If an employee has symptoms of COVID-19, they are to stay home until 3 days after the symptoms resolve and 7 days after the onset of symptoms, or when they were tested, okay, or until they receive a negative test, in which case they can return, okay? So those are for workers who have symptoms of COVID-19. The symptoms identified in the executive order are fever, atypical cough, and atypical shortness of breath. There are no details about what atypical means, and the executive order prohibits employers for asking for documentation. Okay, so you cannot ask for a doctor's note to substantiate these things. That goes against a lot of what we're told is right in the world and the way we've been practicing HR for a long time. So that's you should know that you cannot ask for a doctor's note. Okay, workers can also stay home and you cannot require them to come to work if they have been in close contact with a positive COVID-19 case or close contact with someone who has symptoms of COVID-19. Okay, so that's a pretty broad group. These folks can stay home, must stay home until 14 days have passed since their last contact with an at-risk person. Okay, or that person has received a negative test result. You can consider requiring a return to work clearance if someone has been out because they are symptomatic or have had a COVID-19 positive test result. We do have to be flexible there, though. Frankly, the doctor's offices are still trying to figure all of this out, too. So before prohibiting a worker to come back, you should seek legal counsel to make sure you're on firm ground. Next slide, please. So what are some additional resources that you will find helpful as you get your operations back up and running? One of them, and the example of shameless self-promotion, is Miller Johnson's Back to Work Resource Center. This is just a screenshot of it. You can get to it through our website, and we've got all the forms and the policies, and again, very soon on Monday, the training video required by the executive order. Next slide, please. Additional resources. The CDC is extraordinarily helpful. They have posters you can print out and place throughout your facility, reminding people to use good respiratory hygiene, for instance, covering cough and hand washing and things like that. Frankly, before we were sent home from Miller Johnson, we had printed those out and posted them around Miller Johnson. They're colorful and easy to read, and that is kind of low-hanging fruit for you, right, to print out and post. There's lots of great information on how COVID-19 spreads and the symptoms and all of those things. OSHA has guidance, Keith mentioned this. OSHA has guidance on what they recommend for workforces. They're getting back up and running. Okay, next slide, please. If there is a next slide, there we are. That's us. It's kind of weird just to hear voices and not know who's talking. So that's us who are talking. Keith, we have, it looks like almost 20 questions that have come in while you and I have been talking. Maybe this is a good time. We have a few extra minutes to get to some of those questions.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Thanks, Rebecca. Very good and helpful, and I think there's some good questions here. Let's see. What do we do when someone does not? Go ahead.
Nope, I think you're going to answer the same one.
No, go ahead.
We both know it's a really common question, and We actually did a whole webinar just on this from Amy. What do we do when someone does not want to return to work? Was that the one you were?
Exactly.
Okay, this is for employers who have continued operations. This has already become a major problem for them. My advice is, and again, Keith can jump into because this is a really big issue. You have to identify the reason why they do not want to come to work. Okay, that is the key here. The next question you have to ask is why. If it is because they're nervous, generally, right? They don't have a specific medical condition that makes them high risk. They don't have someone at home who's high risk. They are just nervous, as frankly as many of us are, particularly those of us that have the news on more often than we should. So those folks should be told they need to come to work. That's where the training, that's where the COVID-19 planning comes in handy, talking through all of the things that your organization is doing to keep them safe. You should know that being generally nervous about coming to work and not coming in for that reason is not a qualifying reason to get unemployment. Now, how you present that to the employee is up to you, right? You can say it I would recommend in this environment, saying it in a soft way, but employees should know that. If you are calling people back from layoff, you have work available for them and they do not want to work, being nervous, generally nervous, is not a reason to get unemployment. So their unemployment, to the extent they've been getting it, will be cut off as of the date that work was available to them. So that can be a strong motivating factor, particularly for folks, frankly, that are making a lot of money on unemployment right now, perhaps more than they're making for you, right? With the extra $600 federal kicker, folks are making close to the equivalent of $50,000 a year. And now you're asking them to give that up to come back to work. So that is that's another reason why folks might not want to come back. They might say, I'm making more in unemployment. Can I just stay out and collect my unemployment instead? My guess is the only reason you're calling them back in the first place is because you need them, right? Labor costs are expensive. You're not calling back people you really don't need to be manufacturing your products. So the answer to that will usually be no. Now, if they don't want to come back because they have symptoms or have been exposed to someone with symptoms, then you flip to EO 36, right? And they have to be allowed to stay home for those reasons. If they don't want to come in because they have childcare issues, because school is closed and childcare is in soon summer camps, and decided not to run, then if you're an employer under 500, right, you flip to the FFCRA, and they're probably entitled to leave for that reason. So you need to consider that. If they don't want to come in because they are in a high risk category for severe illness if they catch COVID-19, and that makes them more nervous. Okay, they have a heart condition, for instance, or they have type 1 diabetes or any kind of diabetes or hypertension, or there's a list that the CDC has on its website, and they are fearful for that reason and don't want to come in. Then we enter the world of the ADA, right? Just because COVID-19 is here doesn't mean the ADA ceases to exist. And we start going through the reasonable accommodation interactive process. I could talk for hours about the ADA and the interactive process. I will not bore you with that here. I will just say that the EOC has issued guidance on this. The EOC has listed lots of accommodations that are potential accommodations for people who are high risk that can still allow them to work. The EOC does not jump to a leave of absence, which is, I don't want to come in, right? They're essentially asking for a leave of absence. The EOC says you don't have to jump to that. You can go through the reasonable accommodation process and find an accommodation that might work for them. We will soon have forms up on our resource site just for that purpose. When a person requests a reasonable accommodation because of an underlying health condition, that puts them at higher risk for severe illness. That's what I have to say about that, Keith. I'm sure you have things to add.
Yeah, sure. Common question. I put it into two buckets. One is the legal risk bucket, and two is the practical bucket. On the legal risk side, Rebecca covered a lot of reasons why the not wanting to come to work might be protected. Two other ones to keep in mind is, hey, I don't think it's safe. I don't think it's safe for me and my coworkers. Now we're in the world of the National Labor Relations Act and what we call concerted protected activity. So if you say, well, you're being unreasonable and therefore we're ending your employment or we're deeming you a voluntary quit, you have to be a little careful to make sure that what they're expressing is not concerted protected activity. Same thing from a safety, my OSHA retaliation component. So that's the legal risk bucket. So if you've got someone that doesn't want to come to work and you really want to end their employment relationship, don't do it without consulting counsel. Practical bucket, I would say this. We want people to come to work. Step one, convey all these things that we're doing, why it's safe. Train them, make sure they understand. If they still refuse, where I've landed with many clients is, look, do you want to be the employer that the employee goes to Wood TV or whatever local station and says, hey, they fired me because I said I was a little bit scared of unsafe conditions or work, or, hey, I have I'm high risk. Rebecca's point about some sort of medical condition that makes you high risk. Do you want to be that person, that employer? And maybe you don't. My guess is no one does. So how do you manage that? And practically what we've been able to do is to maybe work with people and say, okay, we're going to give you a little bit of time. We'll give you an unpaid leave of absence. And here you tell us if you're going to be ready to come back in a week or two. And if it becomes indefinite, then it becomes an unreasonable accommodation and you have more options, I think, at that point. And then the other thing is not only could they not be eligible for unemployment, but keep in mind if they apply for it, they may get it and then you got to fight about that. But depending on how you treat people in unpaid leaves of absences, other situations, you may be able to end their medical insurance. And that could be another conversation. You sit down and say, hey, if you're not going to do this, well, then we can't continue your medical insurance because we don't do that for those folks. And that may be a nice incentive for them to come back to work. So those are dicey situations. I think each one should be explored based on the circumstances and the facts. But happy to talk with anyone that's got further questions on that. Let's get to some of these other questions, Rebecca.
Yep, there's several about thermometers. Should we? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
How about I ask you the questions, Keith? Should we do that so we don't have to read?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a number of questions about temperature screening. So let's just knock these out kind of quick style. Okay. Do disposable thermometer forehead strips comply with the requirement to take employee temperatures?
So here, let me say this. I think it's important to remember what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with an executive order that has not been passed through, rulemaking process. The enforcement mechanism is a criminal penalty. And so I will say this, my view on this is if you are trying to substantially comply and you believe that you are actually getting the temperatures of the employees and that works for you, I have pretty good sense or comfort level in saying, look, if you're doing that, I think that's probably sufficient. You're taking their temperatures. It's a touchless way to do it. You're fine. I say that because I don't want people to get all worked up about if I take a misstep here. If you're acting in good faith and it's not quite what this governor believes that should be done, well, how in the world can we predict that? And so I tell clients, take a deep breath. If you're acting in good faith, you're doing what is clearly required and you're taking steps that meet this in the spirit of the requirement, then I think you should feel more comfortable doing that. So I would say, Rebecca, yes, that would be sufficient.
Yep, I 100% agree. This is gonna have the chance to object to any answer you give, Keith, if I don't agree. I doubt that will happen. Okay, next question. Do we have to temp screen freight UPS pickup truck drivers when they come in to pick up our shipments?
I do not believe you do if they are not entering your facility. What I've advised clients to do in that situation is if the drivers are coming in, maybe you just have them do something electronically, have a protocol to make sure that you text or you talk by cell phone so you don't have to have the windows rolled down. As long as there's no interaction, I don't think you would necessarily have to take their temperature. That's my view on that. Incidentally, I would say too is I know there's the Spectrum Health has an app that employees can use to take questions, and that could be part of the questionnaire. I think that's a question that some of our clients are going to have is, will that be sufficient in terms of a questionnaire? And I think it can be, as long as we have electronic records of that and it meets the requirements. So what do you think about that, Rebecca?
I think that's absolutely correct, Keith. You're batting 100% here. All right. Can the training be a written document given to employees? Remember that training I mentioned in my part of the presentation. What do you think about that?
I think there is no answer in the executive order about what constitutes training. I would suggest that if we give our workers something in writing and tell them to read it and say, sign that you read it, I think you could technically argue that that is sufficient. I think that that would be highly questionable if anybody were ever to scratch behind it, because it just doesn't seem like an effective mode of training. I think what's contemplated in this executive order is making sure you communicate this important information. And we all know what happens if you hand a packet to an employee and they sign it and they never read it. And I think you wouldn't want to be in a position where you didn't do some sort of active video or some sort of training where people, short 15, 20-minute video, whatever it is, in person with your safety managers, however you want to do it. If you're just relying on them to read it, you have a major spread, lots of positive cases, like some of these, meat processing plants. And it turns out some investigative reporter says, hey, they just gave this to everyone and said, sign it. They didn't take it seriously. And what kind of message does that send to your employees about their safety? So I think technically, if you, as a lawyer, you wanted me to make that argument and defend it, I could. And I don't know if we'd win or not, but I'd feel a lot more comfortable if we didn't go that route. What are your thoughts?
I agree completely. And in fact, I would even state it a little bit stronger, although I would defend the case. If one of you was found to have violated it because of that reason, we would defend you. But I think a fair reading of the order requires some sort of training beyond handing someone a document. And that is because also in the executive order, it requires you to have a COVID-19 plan in writing that is available. Doesn't say available to who, presumably employees. So if that is what they meant here, that you have to have all this information that's required by training just in writing, available and given to employees, I think they would have said that. I think when folks say you have to train employees on something, I think they mean some sort of something beyond handing them a piece of paper. Now, that can be a human being standing up and training. That can be, I think, a video training, either a live video, a video in a conference room or on someone's desk, and then they check a box, at the end that they completed. Some people call them training modules, right, in other contexts. So, and I also can't agree with Keith more that if you just hand people a piece of paper, you may come across as not taking their safety as seriously as you should. So, and I'm going to pause here just to mention there is, and not to get too deep on you, but or political, but there is a division in this country. Kind of people's worldview differs in how they see the risk, right, and their own personal fear level regarding COVID-19, and it colors the way we make decisions sometimes, right? Because we see things through our own lens and not through other people's. So for people who are not terribly anxious and fearful about COVID-19 for whatever reason, you have to keep in mind that there are some people, and some of them are going to be your employees, that really are fearful. And you may not think that's rational, but it's real to them. Okay, and what percentage of your employees feel that way, I cannot begin to guess, but it's more than one, all right? it's going to be a decent amount of your employees. So if you want people to come to work, if you want to prevent complaints to my OSHA, if you want to do those things, you really have to send the message at every opportunity you can that you're taking this seriously, you've thought it through, you would not be bringing them back to work, you would not ask them to leave their home unless you were confident that you have done everything to keep them safe and healthy. Okay. All right. That's all I have to say on that. I will get off my soapbox now. We are out of time, and we want to get you guys out, but we have several, like 4 or 5 questions, all about the same issue. So let me just ask this one last question that will answer several at the same time. Keith, what do you think about employees taking their temperatures at home or on their own and then reporting that to the employer via the questionnaire or some other mechanism?
I think that's absolutely fine if you cannot get the touchless thermometers or a way to do it. That is clear. I think it's unclear whether that would be sufficient. My guess is that's not going to be sufficient under the executive order. I think it's contemplating, the way I read it, that they be screened when they enter the job site or shortly before as they enter. And so I think while that was sufficient under prior executive orders, if you have access to touchless thermometers, my guess is the executive order is going to say you need to do that. That's where I am.
Yep, I agree too. I think that otherwise some employees will simply write a number down, right, every day without actually taking their temperature. There'll be some percentage of your employees that'll do that. Okay, well, we've gone past our time, Keith, so should we let people get on with their day?
You bet. And we're available for to answer any of these questions. If we didn't get to them, if you want to reach out to us, please do so. Check out the resource page that we have there. We've gotten some questions about that. That is not going to replace our webinars. We're going to continue to do that and make that available. It's going to be above and beyond the basic webinars that we've been providing to our clients. It's going to have additional services, and we've committed as a section, employment section, to update that resource every week. So it's going to be, what we envision it to be is sort of your own up-to-date webinar on all the issues and the most up-to-date forms at whenever you want it. And so it's going to be additional value, we hope, added to you, but it is not going to replace our basic webinars. We're going to continue to do those, so that you don't have to worry about that.
We look forward to these too much. We're not,
That's right.
We're not willing to give up the opportunity to talk to you all once or twice a day. Okay,
yeah,
well, with that, we will, go ahead.
No, I'm all finished. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a great day.